Hey everybody, it's Tim with Uniform Members for Christ. Welcome back. If you've been following this series, we are walking through the book of Genesis, and this week we're in session 11, which is covering chapter 2, verses approximately 8 through 14. So since we have a lot to do, let's jump right into it with verse 8. It says, "And the Lord God planted a garden in Eden in the east, and there he put the man whom he had formed." Well, we have a lot to talk about here, but the first thing I want you to do is we really need to pay attention to the language, a garden in Eden. A lot of times, I've never heard it taught, at least in Sunday schools and usually in classes, you really don't usually hear it said, but you got to understand that there's a land, a territory, or a region called Eden, and within that, there's a garden that's been planted. Now, there are some scholarly debates, of course, right, as to whether the language in the east implies east of Eden or in the eastern part of Eden. I have my own opinion on that. We'll get to it momentarily, but I just wanted to make you aware of that. So one of the things that we'll point out here is that the man was formed outside of the Garden of Eden, for sure. Okay, that's sure. And then he was taken and placed into the garden. So that's interesting information for you as well if you've never heard that. Okay, so again, where did the Lord God plant the garden? Well, it's in Eden, and in my opinion, it's in the eastern part of wherever the land of Eden is. So that's a key to understanding where the garden was located. One of the major keys to understanding it would be to understand where the land of Eden was, and that's complicated because to understand where the land of Eden was, we would have to understand that there is a river that flowed from Eden, and then it split into four parts. So we could probably pinpoint it, except for the challenge is we don't exactly know where two of the four rivers are. Maybe one of the four are a real mystery and it's been lost, but the other one might have just had a name change, and we'll get to that momentarily. I'll just tell you the way I look at it is this. Eden is a larger area, and the garden is a subset of that area. So we might think of Eden as a county, or maybe a city, and within that area there's subdivisions. If we think about it as a county, then we could think about the garden as perhaps a city or a town. And if we think about it as a city or a town, we could think about the garden as a subdivision within that city or town, depending on how large the garden is, and that depends on a few factors as well. The rivers, as I mentioned, likely provide us some clues as to location, and not only that, also to the size. We do have a little challenge there with some language as well, but before we go too far into talking about that, let's read a few more verses. "And out of the ground the Lord God made to spring up every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. The tree of life was in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil." Wow, there's so much that I want to talk about here. However, we will deal more with the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil when we get to chapter 3. So we're going to skip that today. But I do want to mention that you need to pay attention to the language that's employed here. What did God plant? Trees that are pleasant to the sight and good for food. You will notice that is coming back around in chapter 3. So kind of hang on to that and just let it be fresh in your mind when we get to that place. Or if you're reading ahead and you get to chapter 3, I think this will sound very familiar. The only thing I really want to say about the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil today, in today's teaching, was that they were a prominent feature of the garden and perhaps centrally located. Perhaps the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, perhaps they were more extravagant trees. Maybe the fruit was brighter. I'm not really sure, but it seemed that they were a central prominent feature of the garden, which kind of makes sense since our story here centers upon what happens at that tree, right? Okay, let's read verse 10. "A river flowed out of Eden to water the garden, and there it divided and became four rivers." Okay. In this verse again, we are reminded that there's a difference between Eden and the garden. That's good. Here's the thing. Either the river that flowed out of Eden, either it split and became four parts and watered the garden, or as it entered the garden and when it's leaving, it becomes four parts. So that would be very helpful in determining the location, right? If we're talking about one river source that flows directly in, through Eden and then through the garden and then becomes four parts, that could be helpful. It's not as helpful as I'd like it to be because, again, we're missing at least one of the four rivers, if not two. If just to think about it this way, though, depending on how you interpret this, the garden's size, if we're talking about one river that becomes four parts and waters the garden, that could indicate that the garden was a large area that needed that extra water to, and you think about four rivers flowing into it, that could be a fairly substantial area that needed to be watered. Or it could have just been one main river that flowed into Eden and then flowed into the garden, and then afterwards it split up and became four parts. So there is, again, some scholarly debate there. It does make a difference, but unfortunately I don't think we're going to be able to get to the bottom of that. Okay, so I will share with you a theory that I have about the potential size of the garden, but first, let's read a few more scriptures. Verse 11 says, "The name of the first is the Pishon, and it is the one that flowed around the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold." So where is the land of Havilah? To be honest, I'm not sure. There are many theories about its location, and the most popular places it near Saudi Arabia. Verse 12 says, "And the gold of that land is good, bdellium and onyx stone are there." And I just don't have the knowledge available to just tell you all the various reasons people think it might be Saudi Arabia and people think it might be Egypt. That's something you'll have to study on your own. It shouldn't be that hard to get the information. It's just condensing it down to make it a reasonable study. That's the challenge sometimes. Okay, so verse 13. "The name of the second river is the Gihon, and it is the one that flowed around the whole land of Cush." Now, if you're reading this in the King James, or maybe some other translations, your translation will likely say Ethiopia. So that's not a big problem. If you actually look in Blue Letter Bible and you look at the Hebrew word that's employed there, it can be Ethiopia, but really what it means is kind of the region or the territory or the area of Cush. And if you go back, you'll find that Cush was not only a territory and a region, but it's also, if you remember, it's actually the son of Ham and the grandson of Noah. So it's really the region where he settled down at is what we're dealing with here. Okay, so many people think that this river could be associated with the Nile, and if that is the case, you can think the Sudan or perhaps southern Egypt area might be more closely associated with where this river is. All right, let's read verse 14. "And the name of the third river is the Hiddekel, that is which goeth toward the east of Assyria, and the fourth river is the Euphrates." Now, the Hiddekel is most likely the Tigris. I think that's commonly accepted. And we do know both the Tigris and the Euphrates, at least now, perhaps not before the flood, but now originate in Turkey, both of them. And there is a map from Britannica.com that I think will help you visualize this. I'll put it in the description. Okay, so the Hiddekel or the Tigris, it flows from Turkey through Iraq, past the ruins of the ancient city of Nineveh, which I thought was very interesting. And that is near the modern city of Mosul, Iraq. And then it goes all the way south until it empties in the Persian Gulf. And there's actually another fun fact about these rivers I'll share with you in a minute. The Euphrates also originates in Turkey, but it flows through Syria, then Iraq, and finally, like the Tigris, it empties into the Persian Gulf. Now, here's a fun fact about the Euphrates. It also flows near the ancient city of Ur, which was the birthplace of Abraham. So I thought that was kind of interesting as well. So I mentioned above that I'd share a theory about the potential size of the garden with you. Well, I've heard this taught a long time ago, and there's several teachers, so I'm not going to just name one specifically, but some suggest that the garden could have been approximately 1,500 square miles. Now, if that number jumps out at you, it's probably because you're familiar with the dimensions of New Jerusalem, which are mentioned in Revelation chapter 21, 22. So let's just say this. If the four rivers watered the garden, which means they flowed out of Eden into the garden, they became four parts and they watered the whole garden, then it would make sense for it to be a larger area. Now, that's my conjecture, okay, but that it just seems to make more sense for it to be larger. All right, so 1,500 square miles. Now, why is it that they think that? Well, thanks to satellite imagery, there have been some rivers that have been discovered in that region that are now wadis, W-A-D-Is, or dried up riverbeds that seem consistent with where one might place these ancient rivers. And I might mention before we go too much further into this that actually one of the rivers, the second river, the Gihon, actually could be the Nile. So, if that is the case, then we're only really missing one river because we already have the Tigris or the Hiddekel, the Euphrates, and the Nile. The only one that we're missing is the Pishon, right? And that one we really don't know where it is, but there are people who suggest that they found it, and it actually is now underground, and it was a dried up riverbed. It no longer exists above the surface. So that would be really interesting. But anyway, if you do some overlays, and of course you can make anything kind of look like you want it to, but if you do some overlays between what might be the Nile and the Tigris, the Euphrates, and this dried up riverbed, you could come up with something approximately 1,500 square miles. Now, again, that assumes that these rivers divided and went into the garden to water it. What's interesting about that is that 1,500 square miles are, as I mentioned, the dimensions of New Jerusalem that comes down on earth after it's been renovated. So, there is obviously playing with some biblical concepts there and putting some stuff together that may or may not fit, but I just thought it was interesting. But I will just give you some perspective. If we're talking about 1,500 square miles, we're talking about something about the size of Rhode Island. Which I think Rhode Island is actually a little smaller than that. I think it's about 1,200 square miles. Yellowstone's approximately 2,200. The Grand Canyon's approximately 1,900. And funny enough, the Everglades in Florida are about 1,500. So would that make a good location for the Garden of Eden? No, I'm just kidding. Please, there's too many people already that want to tie America into all biblical prophecy, and it's just not really. It doesn't really fit. To be fair, okay. A garden of that size, about 1,500 square miles, it's a lot bigger than your backyard garden, obviously, but it is roomy enough to accommodate all of the trees, the animals, the plants, the rivers, and 2 humans that were told to care for this place. Although the challenge of caring for something that size could be daunting. I'll kind of leave that up to you, how you see it. I will mention this, the geography could have changed significantly in that region after the flood. We do want to keep that in mind when we're, making any kind of conjectures and having fun with this information. Before we wrap things up, I would like to share a theory that I have with you. I cannot prove this from the Bible, but I think that it would be very interesting if the garden actually set where modern day Jerusalem is. Okay, now why do I say that would be very interesting? Well, for several good reasons. One, Paul uses a type or a shadow imagery to connect Adam and Jesus Christ. Adam was the caretaker, him and Eve, of the earth. They had full authority over everything. And then when they disobeyed God, sin was swept in. Well, Jesus Christ, obviously, when he obeyed God perfectly, he made provision for many of us to become sons and daughters of God. So one person at a tree cursed the earth, right, because of their disobedience. But another person, Jesus Christ, on the tree actually broke the curse of sin, and now we are redeemed unto the Father. So thank you so much again for joining me today. May the Lord bless you and enrich your knowledge of Him as you study His Word. Until next week, take care.